Derek Chauvin is appealing his conviction. Kenyan McDuffie is officially off the ballot in D.C. We're going to talk about all of that and more this morning on Let It Be Known. It is Friday, April 29th, 2022. First up, though, let's bring on Lauren Burke of the Burke File and James Wright of the Washington Informer. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, James and Lauren. Before we get into the meat of things with Kenyan McDuffie, let's start with the situation with Tracy Mears. She never doubted that she was the top student at her Illinois high school, but unlike previous star pupils who were named valedictorians, she didn't get the title, which would have made her the first Black student at her school to earn that distinction. Now, nearly 40 years later, she's 55 years old. She's been awarded the long-deserved designation. On April 16th, the superintendent of Springfield Public School District 186 presented her with a certificate and valedictorian medal before an audience of 350 people who had just watched the premiere of the documentary No Title for Tracy. The film chronicles Tracy Mears' youth and the systemic racism she faced, particularly as a senior in high school in 1984. Though Mears had the highest weighted grade point average in her senior class, instead of receiving the valedictorian title that was historically bestowed upon the highest achiever, she was named top student alongside a white peer, Heather Russell. Let's talk about that. Lauren, all these years later, it seems like this, what do they say in the civil rights movement? Justice delayed is justice denied. I mean, how do you make that up?
Yeah, how you make that up is we live in the United States with a 400-year history of racism, and people are very insecure about having to admit, white people are very insecure about having to admit that somebody Black is just as smart as they are, which is why they, did the even thing, because numbers don't lie. We're talking about GPAs. So here we are. I'm actually surprised that they gave it to her even after 40 years, but at least they did do that. There was some acknowledgement that that was a mistake, and they did make like a big deal out of it. At least there wasn't some quiet little ceremony in the back. But there's so many outrageous cases of injustice like this. We saw another one. I can't remember the guy's name, but dude had been in jail for 31 years. Those to me are even more heinous, because you put somebody, first of all, you grab some random Black guy to throw in jail and it's not the right guy, then you don't give him any money at the end. So at least she got the award. I suspect that valedictorian award did not come with any money at the time and probably didn't come now, but at least she's got the documentary, she's got the story, and we have another piece of evidence that the United States has a certain history when it comes to race. Interestingly enough, it'd be interesting to find out if they're actually going to teach this, given the CRT restrictions that Glenn Youngkin wants to put in place. Is this divisive? Is this a divisive concept that this happened? I don't know.
Yeah, and James, Lauren, she nailed it, right? It's just another piece of evidence of racism in this country and how things have gone forever.
Yes, let me say that I don't know how things are in Illinois, but being valedictorian of your high school class is very important. As you know, I'm from the state of Texas. Being valedictorian is very important, because if you are the valedictorian of your class, you get a free ride at public state universities, meaning and that you basically don't have to pay tuition. But some universities, such as the University of Texas at Austin, they give you a full ride for 4 years. So that's very important. Now, like I said, this is Illinois. I don't know whether Illinois does the same thing, but being recognized as a valedictorian, it has a lot of benefits to it. And so I see that she's a Yale Law School professor, and so obviously she's done well for herself. But that distinction, had she had it at that time, might have given her more benefits. I don't know how many more benefits she could have gotten, but it could have given her more benefits. This type of stuff is very important, and it's very important as a symbol also, particularly in Illinois, particularly in 1984, when you just had the election of Harold Washington as mayor of Chicago. So those type of things are important as symbols, and for white people to take that away is just a sign of just how, as Lauren alluded to it, how insecure they are in terms of Black intelligence.
Well, it also speaks to the fact that how important to have Black teachers or teachers who look like you in this sense too. What made me think of that is I remember my 6th grade class at that time. That was the elementary school that I went to. My 6th grade class. It was myself and 2 other students who the teacher. We were in a class that was considered. We had a disciplinarian teacher, Mr. Watson, and he put us up because they looked at his class as, oh, those guys are the behavior problem guys. And no surprise, right, James? I was a behavior problem kid. But he sent us, I'll never forget it, he sent us to Queens College, which I actually wound up going to Queens College as a student. But he sent us to Queens College to take these state exams that had we aced those exams, we would have each been co-valedictorians of the 6th grade graduating class. And he pushed us. His thing was, white folks are not going to give you this chance. And this was a Black teacher telling these 3 Black students, go do this and represent all of us, because white folks are not going to do this for you. I remember it so well. I mean, we didn't ace the test, but the fact is we knew he was in our corner. We knew that the principal, Robert Taylor, we knew all of them were in our corner, these Black educators. So isn't that important, Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a few interesting experiences with guidance counselors at the school that I went to, public school I went to. I went to a private high school, private Catholic school on Long Island. And it amazes me the difference that, particularly when you're that age, people telling you, yeah, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, whether they be white or Black. A lot of times they are Black because they see the differences, obviously, and disparity. So they tend to tell the Black students even more because they know the Black students probably not hearing that. But, you really have to be, when you're Black in high school, you have to ignore almost all the advice you're getting. And hopefully, like my parents were always, there was no choice in the matter. You're going to college. There was no discussion of not going. So you've got that at home. And so you tend to ignore all the strangers that you meet in high school. And that's something I think that if you're a Black kid, particularly in I went to a diverse set of schools. The Catholic school wasn't that diverse, but all the other schools I went to were. And the difference in advice is stark. I mean, you could even see it then at 17, 16 years old. They're pushing you for typing or stuff like that. They're pushing the white kids for gifted and talented, But my mother was a teacher.
You're absolutely right.
So my mother being a teacher in the system made it easier because she knew what the deal was. But it's a very interesting situation.
Yeah, again, my experience, I was 11 years old in the 6th grade, and I just remember being pushed that way, being pushed so hard and thinking, wow, why do you expect so much of us? Because as Mr. Watson says, never will a white educator do this for you. And I see my sister is writing, Dr. Nicole McDaniel says, yep. And about 3 years later, I was the valedictorian of our elementary school, LOL. I didn't have Mr. Watson. So we went to the same elementary school, and she actually got valedictorian is what she's telling me. Boy, once again, she one-ups me with that doctor title. But anyway, but it's so true. We certainly need more educators like Mr. Watson. We need more educators who look like us. Certainly miss that. I talk about him a lot because he was probably, of all the, it's so funny, in 6th grade, of all the Black men in my life, all the men in my life, he had the greatest impact by far.
Yeah.
So always remember Mr. Watson. Also this morning, the former Minneapolis police officer who was convicted of murdering George Floyd has filed an appeal in his case. Derek Chauvin has filed an 82-page appeal that lists more than a dozen aspects of the case that he and his attorneys argue tainted last year's proceedings. Among them are the extensive pretrial publicity and protests outside of the courthouse, as well as the announcement of the city's $27 million settlement with the Floyd family, which came during jury selection. James, is there any light here for Derek Chauvin? Is there any chance here? Let me preface it by saying, I think from my view, his only avenue is that $27 million settlement. Your thoughts?
I totally agree with you. This guy has no light at all. when the appeals court looks at all of the evidence and considering the circumstances of it, they're just going to throw a lot of that out. But the defense, they've got to do that. They've got to do that. That's what Chauvin hired them to do it. And so they've got to do that. But in terms of the specifics of the case, what can you do about pretrial publicity? What can you do about protests outside the court? You can't do anything about that. And that doesn't even reach the legal principles that the defense should be pro-offering. If I were a defense attorney, I would really focus on the jury more than anything, and not so much the jury being influenced by outside forces. I would focus more on the composition of the jury.
Lauren, first of all, let me get your thoughts on it.
Well, obviously, he does have to file an appeal. I can't think of a case where somebody has not filed an appeal in a case like this. But the problem he has, of course, is that video that went around the world, you want to talk about pretrial publicity, there was no putting that genie back in the bottle. You can't choke somebody out for 9 minutes over maybe it's a counterfeit 20 and think that you're going to do that and get away with it. I don't care if you're in a police uniform or not in a police uniform or anything else. And I suspect that anybody on appeal, whatever their appeals court system is, whether it's a 3-judge panel or 1-judge panel or whatever it is, I can't imagine that they're going to overturn that type of hot potato. Because if they thought they saw protests then, they're definitely going to see him on a flip. So there's that. And I don't understand why there'd be a need to overturn that. I mean, for him to try to argue that he was doing that within the course of his duties. It's within the course of your duties to choke somebody for 9 minutes over a nonviolent offense that you have down and 4 officers around him. It's a hard argument to make.
Yeah. So the one problem, and again, I agree totally. Just wanted to play a little devil's advocate, as I mentioned to James, Lauren. The one thing that stands out is the timing of the settlement, the announcement of the settlement. Could that be a problem with some judges?
It could be a problem. Yeah, it could be a problem. The thing is, though, are we trying to argue? I mean, is their argument going to be that the announcement of the settlement was any more prejudicial than a video that was out there for months, and actually almost a year? I mean, that video was out there. So again, I don't understand how you put these genies back in the bottle. So the settlement press coverage was bigger than the video of him choking George Floyd to death. I'm not sure he's going to be able to make that argument. So your activity on video is probably going to trump the settlement announcement. But I think it is a good argument for them to make on an appeal. There's no doubt about that. I'd make that argument if I was his attorney. But at the end of the day, you're left with what he did.
Yeah, exactly. But what happened to, if you recall, he had made this cryptic announcement or statement after the verdicts, and that something along the lines, and I don't remember the exact statement, and perhaps James, you remember, or Lauren, you remember, basically telling the Floyd family that they would understand more. People thought he was actually going to commit suicide or something from the statement. I wish I had the statement in front of me, but do you recall that, Lauren or James?
I don't recall it. There's interesting sort of information about whether or not Chauvin knew Floyd and how well he knew Floyd and all that. To me, whether or not he knew him or had encountered him before, which, by the way, we find this in many cases. We find this in the Eric Garner case, where somehow some cop wants to make Eric Garner his toy to bother, every time he sees him. This is what happens to me. We have, 47,000 cops sitting around with nothing to do, and only 250 murders in a city of 8.2 million people. That would be New York. You have too many cops around trying to figure out ways to bug people. These are these petty idiot offenses, just like the guy Patrick Lyoya. That's the other one. I'm stopping you for what? For your license plate might not be the right light. Who cares, right? So and this thing to me is another idiot thing. Somebody calls, but I don't know that anybody cares about what Eric Chauvin has to say, one way or the other. We'll find out on this appeal.
Yeah,
I think it also has to do, Stacey, with some sort of psychological white supremacy thing. You know, I really didn't do this, but there's a real reason why I did this. And this is going to come out later. This is a white supremacy, you know, I'm always right type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think Lauren nailed it again, as she always does. She talks about New York and all of these cops, and they're piling on too, because this idea of adding more police, adding the new mayor wants more undercover officers. Those undercover officers in New York, and growing up in New York, you know, they're very notorious for racism and harassment.
And also, you know, coming up on people and the people don't know they're cops and then they react. That's been a story over and over again in New York. Full disclosure, my father was a member of the New York City Police Department and a corrections officer at Rikers Island and the Brooklyn House of Detention. And my nephew once was a cop for 7 years in Virginia. I have a bunch of cops in the family. So I've listened to cop stories my entire life, listened to crime stories my entire life. So I'm just saying, though, that I don't know that we need 40,000 cops. I mean, the city, when my dad was on the job, you know, they averaged somewhere in between, you know, this is the crack cocaine years that included that, average somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 murders a year. Now they're doing 200, 300 murders a year. So violent crime is down generally, but nobody wants to talk about that. They want to act like there's always crime. But this whole thing is industry. It's money. It's pensions. The whole thing is just incarceration in this country, and we still lead the world in the rate of incarceration, is all about money. And you got to feed something through that machine. You got to justify the existence of this thing, and nobody wants to question it.
Well, James, it's official. Lauren is the cooler version and the black version of Aaron Reagan. So there you go. Listen, on Thursday, a 3-judge panel rejected Kenyan McDuffie's attempt to get back on the ballot in the race for Attorney General, upending the contest to replace the retiring Attorney General Carl Racine and leaving McDuffie without a job in just a few months. The judges ruled that the D.C. Board of Elections made the right call in deciding that McDuffie wasn't eligible for the AG race because he's not, quote unquote, actively engaged as an attorney, as DC law requires. This is huge, Lauren and James, because not only does it leave McDuffie without a job because he's leaving the council, but to be in the middle of this race and to be where he's at in this race, for this challenge to come up now and then to be disqualified, DC has no representation anyway. And this just really underscores that I think more than ever, DC needs statehood.
That too. James, you go first.
Well, let me just say that this, as you know, I've been following this case very closely. This does not surprise me because generally in DC, the Court of Appeals follows the agencies. They follow the agency rulings. It is not, it just does not happen that they generally overturn an agency's ruling. This is what the case was here. Many of us kind of suspected that this was the case because on a real tip, he did not meet the statutory requirements, but we've seen exceptions to that many times. So there was a hope that, well, maybe, they'll let this go by because he is a council member and he is a lawyer, he's a member of the bar. But apparently, for some reason, they decided to clamp down. But let me say that I'm not saying this, and I'm giving you my Richard Nixon face. I'm not saying that the establishment had anything to do with this. I'm not saying that position with that 5 to 10 year requirement had anything to do with that for a reason, because many people in the establishment bar want somebody that they can have access to and control. I'm not saying that at all with my Richard Nixon face.
Well,
yeah.
Phil, the council chair, Phil Mendelson, supported Kenyan McDuffie, and he actually helped write the law, I believe, and he disagrees with this decision. Yeah,
and he plans to do absolutely nothing about it. All right, which he could. He has the power to do something about it, like right now. The words actively engaged are subjective. Now, how you want to define actively engaged attorney, I have no idea. I do know we live in a country where you don't have to be an attorney to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. You don't have to be an attorney to be the Attorney General of the United States. So how the hell D.C., Washington, D.C., which is barely a place that can be defined as a city, came up with this idiocy into their law? I have no idea. It is being used for probably exactly what the original intent of it was, which is to upend somebody that they want to get rid of with a technicality, because this is all in service to Carl Racine wanting his white buddy on to be AG of DC, because Carl Racine served with this guy at Venable Law Firm. That's what this is about. So we stick some, black guy that nobody's ever heard of onto the race, so he can maybe split the black vote, because black people in DC are supposed to be stupid. But what you have is Carl Racine pushing for a white guy to be the AG of a black city. That's the understory. And whether Sherwood and these local reporters, Sam Ford, are going to catch on to that and say it on TV, I have no idea, but they need to catch on to that and say it on TV, because the person they should be talking to about this is Carl Racine and Bruce Spiva, who engineered this moment, right? So we're waiting around. We've had other people who've run for AG of DC who've said that they didn't know whether or not actively engaged meant that they qualified, tried to find out and got silenced because they weren't a threat to anybody. Kenyan McDuffie raises $900,000. Everybody knows he's going to win. He's the threat. Let's come up with something. Yes. But it's the height of irony that in a city with no political representation, the people, the voters of DC can't even decide this. It's some unelected board out of nowhere, because the members of the city council came up. Because remember, it says in the law something about 5 to 10 years actively. Yes, it's not even actively engaged for the last 6 months. It's like 5 to 10 years. So if Kenya wanted to run in 4 years, he probably couldn't do it. I mean, that's how ridiculous this is. And it's a great example of why people get disillusioned about politics, as they should.
Yeah, Lauren James, Lauren makes a great point, right? A city with no representation, they're not even allowing their citizens to decide on the few choices that they have.
Yes, and that is a sticking point for many Washingtonians and our allies around the country. We need statehood because we need to have self-determination over our politics. We need self-determination over the land that we have here. And we need self-determination over ourselves in the district. This is just a prime example of how little power the people really have in DC. I'm just speechless in that aspect. And Lauren talked about Phil Mendelson's not going to do anything. And no, he's not going to do anything. And the reason is because he probably couldn't get the 7 votes that he needs. No, I'm sorry, 9 votes that he needs in order to enact emergency legislation in order to get Kenyan on the ballot. So that's why he's not going to do anything. And but Kenyan does have options, but they're very, very weak.
I mean, he's appealing.
Yeah. In, like you said, embark, and then of course, he could run as an independent in November.
Can they write his name in too? Can his name be written in on the ballot?
Yes, but even if he were to win, he could not serve.
Yeah, see, it's a disqualifying. I mean, basically what this reaffirms is what we already knew, which is that Washington, D.C. has become the political plaything of developers and politicians in love with those developers. And we can see it all around the city of Washington, D.C. We saw it with City Center. You see it with the development near National Stadium. It's just obvious what this is. All right. This is just about tax base and gentrification, getting all the poor people out of the city into Prince George's County or wherever they can push them out. And that's pretty much what Washington has become. They've copied the model of New York, but New York is a completely different situation economically. And so it is painful to watch, because, the tent cities around DC will shock and amaze you. Yeah. That's the other thing. And, because we're dealing with big law firms and they got to put their guy in, that's what this is. That's what this becomes.
So you're also stating the case there as to one of the many reasons why there's been this reluctance to move statehood forward, right?
Yeah, statehood is about control. It's not
Right.
about statehood. It's about control. It's about Black people. It's about a predominantly Black city, and Black people having control and making decisions. See, I mean, that's what people are laser focused on. Okay, that's why all of a sudden you've got plans in the U.S. House of Representatives to have some rule in the House that limits the amount of time that chairs can serve as chair people, because that hits the Black caucus. Then we wouldn't have Maxine Waters and Benny Thompson and Bobby Scott as chairs, right? And three other people. They're laser focused. The opposition to the Black political agenda is laser focused on Black people not having control over anything, even in a city that's predominantly Black. This city is still predominantly Black. Right?
Stacey, keep in mind.
By the way, what's Carl Racine doing? Why is Carl Racine endorsing Brian Schwab over Kenyan McDuffie? That's a question that all in the media should be asking. Why is that happening?
Right.
We know the answer. They're friends. They were at Venable together. But if we talk about policy, what is that about?
Yeah. Good point.
Well,
and keep in mind, go ahead, Stacey.
I was going to say, so what is McDuffie's future outside of this now? He's not going back to Kansas. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say in one sentence, Eleanor Holmes Norton is 86 years old. I don't know how long she plans to stay around. She doesn't have to vote, so that could be a long time, but that would be some place to look.
Yes.
The fact that they did this, go ahead.
Yeah, that's definitely one place he can look. Now, of course, he has the option I just mentioned a second ago of running as an independent for the Ward 5 seat in November. I don't know how viable that is, but you never know. There may be a groundswell for that in light of this case. But he does have options. He can teach at one of the law schools and all that type of stuff. So he has options, but I really would like for him to have been Attorney General.
Oh, absolutely. It is crazy what just happened. I mean, I think people don't have appreciation. Of course, DC doesn't get the media because Washington Post doesn't really cover local DC because they're trying to compete with the New York Times. So they're trying to be a national paper. So they don't care about what happens in DC. And you don't have the William Raspberries. You do have Cortland Malloy sitting there, but effectively, the Washington Post doesn't have anybody on staff, Black on staff, that would blow this up to any degree. So it's just happening in the background,
That's why we need you, James, right? Put that pen to paper for the Washington Informer so we can be informed. Well, so you mentioned in our few remaining moments, let's just the qualifications of Kenyan McDuffie. We talk a lot about the qualifications of candidates. What would he bring to that office?
A progressive vision that they don't want enacted, and not some big, white law firm vision, connecting the contracts up. I mean, it just that's the problem with Kenyan. That's the problem with Kenyan McDuffie. I mean, it's Carl Racine should have to answer a few questions here. I'm telling you.
Lauren is so right, and let me tell you why she's so right. Kenyan McDuffie would bring up tenants' right cases.
Right.
Kenyan McDuffie would bring up cases in terms of small businesses and particularly minority development, minority contracts. He will do that. Carl Racine did not do those type of things. Now, Carl Racine sued one major landlord in terms of tenants' rights, but what about all the others? And in terms of economic rights, in terms of business contracting for minorities and women businesses, no, Carl didn't do anything like that because he has, like Lauren said, a law firm perception, and he doesn't really care about that. And besides, if he had to do that in terms of the law firms, that might go into what he does, and he doesn't want to mess that up. So that's why they don't want Kenyan McDuffie in that position.
Wow. Well, it is always interesting. DC politics. Oh my goodness. it just never ceases to amaze. We thank Lauren Burke, of course, as always, and James right of the Washington Informer. Great discussion. Appreciate you guys. Join the NMPA in New Orleans in June. Our summer conference, I was going to say midwinter, our summer conference, 195 years, celebrating 195 years of the Black press, amplifying our voices for freedom, justice, equality, and equity, June 22nd to June 25th at the Hilton New Orleans Riverside Hotel. If you go on NMPA dash events, I always think hyphen is not hyphen, it's dash events, NMPA-events.com, and register. Get a great reduced rate on the hotel. So join us. Stephanie Mills is joining us, and she's going to perform like nobody else can live. When she sings live, she always sings live, and nobody can top her. Thanks for joining. Let it be known. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.